one. The white soul brother, they called it. He put the soul in the music.
Bert Berns, one of the greatest songwriters of all bloody time. You know, it's as simple as that.
The guy was a genius.
Shake it up, baby. Shake it up, baby. Twist and shout.
A lot of people think we wrote it.
Well, shake it up, baby. Shake it up, baby. Twist and shout.
Once he started cutting hits, he never stopped.
He was the emperor of rhythm and blues.
Everybody wanted Bert.
Heartbreak and hope and anxiety and fear.
Take the tempo down a hair. It's a little too bright.
And they masquerade as teenage records.
This is fresh, this is hot. That just knocked him out.
And he wrote great songs.
And he met a man, his name was Tommy Ryan, Tommy Eppley. He didn't know he was the head of the mob.
What the hell are you doing with these people?
Take another little piece of my heart now, baby.
Man, why didn't you give us that song?
Bert Berns scared important people in the record business, and they're still scared.
You have got yourself into shit you have no idea.
I did what I had to do.
Guys, congratulations on this documentary. I loved it so much. I got the chance to see it yesterday. I didn't know who Bert Berns was. I knew all of those songs, I think, by heart. You dedicate an incredible amount of time to one of my favorite songs, Cry Baby. And I realized when I was watching this, I was like, oh, this is one of my favorite songs, and I know nothing about it. What an idiot. But these songs are ubiquitous. Everybody knows them at this point, but they don't know Bert Berns, your dad. Now, you started this 10 years ago. Was that the impetus? Was that why you started this?
Yes, my father was one of the great songwriters and record producers of the 20th century, but nobody knew who he was, and I didn't really even know who he was because he died when I was so young, and so it was our mission to tell this story so that people would pay attention to his incredible body of work.
And Bob, when did you get involved?
I got involved about 2 years ago. Brett had conducted about 90% of the interviews. They were in the can. And we were introduced, and he brought me on the project to help them finish it.
Wow. So now getting these interviews, you get Keith Richards, Paul McCartney, Solomon Burke. We see everybody in here. How easy was it to get them? Were they like, Bert Berns doc, let's do it. I want to talk about him. Because they're all so excited.
Yeah, it was a long process. We thought, let's get the guys and women who were closest to my dad, the Sissy Houstons and the Solomon Burkes first, and those are the heroes of people like Paul McCartney and Keith Richards. So we kind of built it and hoped that they would come, and they did.
What were you most surprised to learn about your dad that you didn't already know?
There's so many revelations. The deep autobiographical body of work was one of the huge revelations. How far and wide his mob connections went was another big revelation.
That's so interesting because in the film we hear about like 2 or 3 guys. Was it bigger than that? Was it even bigger than that?
It started with Wazzle, who we see in the film, and went up to Patty Pagano, who was a major guy in the Westchester mob, and then all the way up to Tommy Eppley, who was basically the top guy in the New York Mafia.
This is incredible because these are the big hits of this era. These are the legendary songs, and that's how big the mob was. They were connected to everything.
Well, they were infiltrated in the whole recording industry. It wasn't like particular to Bert Berns. I mean, it goes back to jukeboxes were controlled by the mob. So they controlled what songs got on the jukebox. So, I mean, this goes way back. So they were just part of the fabric of the recording industry. Not so much today. Everything's very corporate. We were talking to Stephen Van Zandt, our narrator, once, and he said the difference between the recording industry today, which is corporate run, and the industry in, say, in the 60s when the mob was still around, is that everyone got paid. When the mob ran things and they got paid what they said they were going to get paid. They may not have gotten paid a nickel more, But today it's a little bit tougher with the corporations and things being run by lawyers.
Right, a different kind of mob.
Yeah, different kind of mob.
Some would say. So you set out to make this documentary about 10 years ago to tell the story of your father, Bert Berns. What was the major difficulties that you ran into?
I mean, the hardest part for me was just getting started, because as a first-time filmmaker, just getting started and not knowing what to do was really the most difficult part. But I knew to find brilliant people along the way to help me realize this vision, and nobody was more important than my editor and co-director, Bob Sarles.
So how did you get started?
A friend of mine, Leo Ferroletto, one of the producers, just kick-started us. He's just, okay, I'm set it up. We've got film crew here, and we had a couple people to interview, and before I knew it, I learned to edit in Final Cut, because it was like the necessity is the mother of invention, so I started to put a rough cut together, and I did that for many, many years before Bob came on board.
And then, Bob, you came on board, and it was sort of shaping the film into a final story?
Brett had done a really good job of combing through the footage and really finding a lot of the best bites, a lot of the bites that helped tell the story, but a lot of the connective tissue wasn't really there. The narrative wasn't there, the whole story arc. And also, I really felt like New York City needed to be a character in the film, so we had to do a lot of deep research, which was done by my filmmaking partner, Christina Keating, who's also my wife. And she found all this great footage. And I just worked closely with Brett, helping find the story and shaping the narrative. The book that Joel Selvin wrote, the definitive biography, is over 400 pages long. Out of that 400 pages, we extracted about 20 pages of copy that we used as the narrative track to sort of be the connective tissue to help tell the story.
How did you guys get Stevie Van Zandt involved? Obviously, he's a huge music fan. I'm sure he knew who Bert Berns was.
Yeah, well, it was, again, once we realized, okay, we need a narrator for this film, and we looked at each other and we thought, okay, who's going to do it? And really, there was no second choice. It was Stephen Van Zandt. He's a musicologist, he's a historian, he's an educator, he's also, you know, a little bit of the tough guy, you know, that Bert Berns is, and so he brought all those characteristics into the narration.
How old were you when your father passed away?
I was 2.5, my sister was 10 months old, and my brother was 2 weeks old. So we had 3 kids in 3 years. He was just in such a hurry to live as much of his life as he could with that rheumatic heart, that ticking time bomb, but he had 3 kids in 3 years, the record label, everything, and there was nothing that he didn't do in that short time.
He was an incredibly busy, fast-paced, moving guy, right?
Yeah, I mean, he was just like in a hurry constantly. Sissy Houston says it in the film. I mean, he was just on that wheel, running, knowing that his time would run out at any minute. And so I think that was the driving force in his life that helped him create this music and write his pathology into that music.
When you have a father who is a legend like this, who you didn't necessarily get to know growing up, do you find that you spend most of your life trying to catch up and understand this genius that you never got the chance to really know personally?
Yeah, my mother would always tell me and my siblings that my father would say, my children will know me through my music. And that was a riddle that I didn't really understand until I grew up and dug into the body of work and met his collaborators.
So you heard Cry Baby, basically.
Yeah, one of my favorite all-time songs is Cry Baby, the original Garnett Mims version that Janis Joplin covered.
Yeah. That is an unbelievable song, and you explore that in the film, that he may have suffered from depression or have been a relatively, somewhat melancholic man, which is where a lot of these songs came from, right?
Yeah, he wrote his pathology, again, Joel Selvin said it in the book, into the songs. And so all these songs about the encroaching night, Here Comes the Night, and songs with tears, Cry Baby, Cry to Me, Cry No More, Peace of My Heart, and Heart Be Still were the last 2 songs that he wrote and produced. So you can really see that this heart condition and his impending doom was weighing on him heavily.
He was never expected to live into his 30s. And his career didn't take off until he was 30, 31. So he was really trying to cram everything he could. He didn't know how long he had.
One of the things that you see in the documentary that you don't normally hear about when it comes to record producers, especially in this time, is the reverence that the artists he worked with have for him, that they still hold for him. Quite often you hear of artists who are just like, oh, this producer ripped me off, or this producer didn't record the track the way that we thought they would. With Bert, they all love him, which it's unbelievable.
Well, and the fact that Brett was the one who did the interviews.
No one was going to say otherwise. No.
Well, no, that's not really the point I want to make, but you know, hopefully people were honest. I think they truly did love Bert, But they opened up to Brett in a way that I don't think they would have opened up to, say, me or any journeyman filmmaker, because they were making a connection with Bert's son, who didn't know his father, and they knew his father, and they loved his father so much. So they were really opening up their souls and bearing their souls for the camera, but they were really doing it for Brett, because he was the one who was on the other side of the camera asking the questions. So I think that we got tears and laughter and just reactions that I don't think we would have gotten had anybody else conducted the interviews.
Brett, did it ever get emotional for you on the other side of the camera conducting these interviews?
Oh, absolutely. My mother, she cried through the interview. Brenda Reed, there was a lot of tears during the interviews, and it was terrifying for me sometimes sitting there across from people like Paul McCartney and those guys. But their love for my father came through in these interviews, and it was very emotional for us.
Was there ever any regret on the part of Paul McCartney or of the Beatles in regards to how famous they got over Twist and Shout? I mean, we see in the trailer McCartney says, people think we wrote it, and in many ways it takes away from the first performance, the first group that did record it, and Bert Berns' writing of it.
Well, somebody once said that the Beatles came along and put all these guys out of business, like all the writer-producers, the self-contained artists came along with the Beatles, and that was sort of the beginning of the end of that Brill building songwriter era. I mean, there was no stopping that British invasion.
But they revered these songwriters too, and those early albums, there's all sorts of covers of Motown songs and Brill building songs. I mean, these are the songs that the Beatles really loved and emulated. Then they matured as songwriters and kind of blew everybody out of the water.
There's a quote of Keith Richards in the film that is like, if you want to write an R&B song, you got to be better than Bert Berns, or like you can't write an R&B song if you don't know something similar along those lines. Excuse me for paraphrasing the quote. Did that surprise you to hear someone like Keith Richards say that? A guy who has the most incredible amount of success rock music can give you is still saying like we're just trying to catch up to Bert Berns.
Yeah, that was pretty shocking to hear him say that. But I knew that those guys love this music, and that was the sort of transformative moment in musical history that they dialed into. And so when he said that you have to top "Are You Lonely for Me, Baby," which is not a song that many people know, that was one of those mind-blowing moments for us.
There's a moment in the film where someone says that they are the backing vocal on Brown Eyed Girl, basically. Like, la, la, la. They're like, oh, that's me. And I was watching it, and I was thinking to myself, like, how amazing must that be? Brown Eyed Girl is played everywhere all the time, where you can just sit there and go to your kids or someone like, that's actually me, I'm the backing vocals. But you get to say all the time, my dad wrote that song, because these songs are everywhere all the time. What does that feel like when you are in a place and randomly a Bert Berns song comes on, whether it's by the original artist or by the Beatles or someone even covering it later?
Yeah, that's Jeff Barry, the great songwriter who was partnered with Ellie Greenwich on so many hit records, who sang backgrounds on Brown Eyed Girl. And the songs are everywhere. There's not a sort of a day that goes by where I feel like I don't go somewhere and hear one of his songs, and he's just always present in our lives that way.
Did you want to say something? I saw you moving.
Actually, Brown Eyed Girl was written by Van, but it was produced by Bert. As was Under the Boardwalk. It was not written by Bert, but it's very much associated with him because he produced it. They're just amazing songs. And when my wife and I, Christina and I, are at home listening to the radio or watching television, invariably one of Bert's songs will show up in a commercial, and we just look at each other and we go, ka-ching. Because I know that it's helping pay for this film.
Right. Going back to some of the mob ties, what was it like interviewing them about this period of time? Were they as open about it as you thought they should be, or as you thought there was there for what they should be talking about, or are they still fairly closed off about their dealings?
Well, when we got Carmine DeNoia to give us that interview, and he was like a father figure to me growing up, so like he wouldn't have ever given an interview like that to anyone else because those guys don't talk. And it was a riveting interview. I mean, we couldn't even use all of the things that he said. It's just like there was hours of talking about smashing up bootleggers with baseball bats and, these great stories that, and Wazzle was, the great interview. Like, I mean, when you think of all the stars in the film, that we got Carmine DeNoia, this legendary record industry guy, to come on camera and really tell the truth about what happened was an extraordinary coup.
I mean, there's incredible interviews in the film, and there's massive stars that are interviewed in the film, but you're absolutely right. The two interviews that you come away with at the end of the movie that really linger and stick with you are this guy Wazzle and your mother, who is just incredibly strong in the film, totally captivating, and a woman who knows exactly what she wants, even though it seems like she was just going off of instinct her whole life. Was that the case?
Yeah, my mother, people say, what was the hardest interview to get? Was it Paul McCartney or Van Morrison or Keith Richards? And I say it was my mother, because she really made me fight to get that interview. Yeah, she waited until we built the film, and she came in and she was fired up, and was an incredible interview and performance.
How long did you interview her for?
It was like an hour and a half interview, and she got up at the end and walked off, and it was just an amazing, I asked her one question and she just went off and sort of told the story. And
when she walks off in the film, was that the end of the interview for you guys as well?
Yeah, that was it. She just got up, she goes, that's my interview, and she walked off and had us all in tears. And I should say my mother, who just joined me for a screening in Miami a few weeks ago, a couple of months ago, passed away right after the screening, and so we raced to sort of change the end credits and acknowledge her, that she had passed. But yeah, incredible. I can't believe she's gone.
Unbelievable. What was it like growing up with a woman like that? I have to ask, because she's incredibly strong-willed.
Yeah, I've never met a man or a woman more powerful than my mother, and she took.
Everybody else says that knows her as well in the film, and I think you have a number of interviews where people say she was so hot, she was also tough as nails.
Yeah, she was, go-go dancer in the Peppermint Lounge, and they fell in love, and they had 3 kids really quickly. But she picked up after he died and had an amazing 10-year run, signed Paul Davis and Peabo Bryson and Brick, and had hit after hit in the 70s, and then sold the record label, and that was kind of the end of that era.
Unbelievable. Let's get some questions from the audience right here.
Hey, gentlemen, thank you for being here. So, in your perspective, what do you think music has changed over the years from your generation to this generation in songwriting?
Well, I think it was better. And I don't know if that's just like, a boomer-centric answer, but I try to be as subjective as I can. And I just feel really lucky. I mean, I was born in '57, and I grew up on this music. This music is a soundtrack of my life. And I remember years ago, about 10 years ago, I took my daughter, who was about 15 at the time, to go see the Monkees do a reunion show at the Fillmore in San Francisco. And I remarked to her, I said, in my day, this was commercial pop music. This was not cutting edge. This was as commercial as it got. And it was great, great music, and it holds up. I sound like an old fart, but I just don't think that the pop music today is going to age as well as the music from the 60s. I think that music is just timeless for some reason. I don't know what it is that makes it timeless, but I just think it is.
Is there I guess you're saying this when you say timeless, but there's just an argument to be made that it doesn't feel like anything really lands now in the way that things landed then. There's so much culture, there's so much music, there's so much stuff to take in, that nothing really feels like it has a sort of pop culture landing where everybody's listening.
I can remember when I hear certain songs, pop songs, I can get transported, and I can remember what season of what year it was that song landed, because it was like every 4 weeks there were another bunch of songs on the charts, and these are all songs that have lived on.
Next question.
Hey guys, I was wondering were your siblings involved in the movie or at all, and did you or either of them ever get involved in the music industry or want to pursue a career in music?
Yeah, the whole family are musicians, and we're all musical people, but, having a father like that kept us from really, sort of taking any big steps in the music business. My sister, with the one exception, she did a country version of Piece of My Heart, and I thought, that's blasphemy. How can you do that? This is a classic rock and soul record, and Faith Hill covered it and had a #1 record with Piece of My Heart Country, so that was really a great moment for my sister. But yeah, we're all musical people. My sister and I are full-blown partners on this film and on the musical that we're bringing to Broadway about my dad. My brother is out trying to save the world. He's a permaculturalist, so yeah, he's...
And Brett's daughter is going to probably be the next Taylor Swift. And I'm not kidding. She is incredibly talented.
Really? How old is she?
She's 9 years old, and it's like genius skips a generation. I'm living proof that happened with my daughter. She's just incredible. She plays guitar, she writes songs. She's nothing that she doesn't do in music, and she's 9 years old, and I'm like hiding her away for another 5 or 6 years before anybody can see this musical genius that's sprouting right in front of my eyes.
You're hiding her away because you don't want her to be abducted by like the industry. I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, I was wondering if there was a song that you were surprised that your dad wrote or produced.
Wow, yeah. I knew the hits growing up, the Twist and Shout and the Hang on Sloopy and those songs. It was never a surprise. 25 Miles is actually a song that's a huge hit with Edwin Starr, and it turned out that was a copyright infringement, and so my dad got credited for it later in life.
Wait, so he didn't write 25 Miles?
He is credited as writing 25 Miles because...
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah, that song. It was originally 32 Miles from Waycross, and they kind of borrowed very heavily from the song, so my father ended up getting writer credit on that song.
Was that covered in the movie? I don't remember that being covered.
No, there's so many parts of the story we couldn't cover in the movie. Jimmy Page, another song that my dad wrote was Baby Come On Home, which was called Tribute to Bert Berns in bootleg world for many, many years. And it was recorded on Led Zeppelin 1, and Jimmy Page wrote that tribute to my dad, and it was another song that we discovered late in life.
Near the end of the film, you have all of these artists who are essentially saying Bert Berns isn't known as well as he should be known. And it's a statement of essentially, why the documentary exists, why you guys are doing this, because Bert Berns deserves to be a legend. He deserves to be sort of a household name. How do you feel like you can attain that outside of this documentary? Do you feel like it's your life's work in many ways to make sure that happens?
Yes, that was the goal of everything that we did, was how are we going to get our father in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? It was really kind of this...
Which you did. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. That was a big surprise that happened last year. And we made the film and the book, Joel Sullivan's book, which came, we got behind that, and the Broadway show in order to really, get people aware of this extraordinary music legacy, because the story is like the stuff of fiction, and we knew we had to tell this dramatic life story for people to pay attention to this body of work.
Absolutely. Guys, the film is amazing. You did an incredible job. The story of Bert Berns is just absolutely fascinating. It's like the best music possible to listen to. It's so much fun to watch. How can people see it?
Well, we're opening up Wednesday night, tomorrow, at the IFC Center in New York City. That's our first commercial theatrical release. We've been doing the film festival circuit for the last year, and so now we're opening it up to the general public, and we're going to be playing in theaters across the country. We're going to be opening up in San Francisco for a week, Los Angeles for a week, Chicago for a week, and we hope for a really good turnout at these initial screenings so that other movie houses across the country will pick it up and we'll have a good run. And then by the end of the year, we'll see DVDs and video on demand and the usual streaming outlets for the film.
Congratulations, guys. Thank you so much for being
Thanks
here.
for having
Bang the Bert Berns Story, everybody. Thank you, guys.